The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under the door of her cramped studio apartment in a cream-colored envelope that smelled faintly of sandalwood and old money. Elara Vance almost threw it away, assuming it was another overdue bill notice or a flyer for the laundromat downstairs. But the weight of the paper was wrong. Too thick, too textured, and when she tore it open, she found a single sheet of letterpress cardstock with gold leaf edging and handwriting so precise it looked engraved. Miss Elara Vance, your reputation precedes you. Your services are required for the tuning and preparation of a 1923 Steinway Model D grand piano at the Whitmore estate. The engagement is private and time-sensitive. Compensation will be 5 times your standard rate, plus travel. A car will arrive at 4 p.m. on Friday. Formal, but unobtrusive attire is requested. No signature, just a phone number, with a Manhattan area code and a crest embossed at the bottom. A serpent coiled around a tuning fork, which struck Elara as both absurd and vaguely threatening. She read the letter 3 times, her thumb tracing the serpent's scales. 5 times her rate. That was rent for 2 months. That was the dental work she'd been putting off. That was enough to finally replace the worn-out hammers in her own tuning kit, the ones she'd been nursing, along with felt scraps and hope for the past year. She called the number before she could talk herself out of it, and a voice like smoked glass answered on the first ring. Miss Vance, you received our invitation. It wasn't a question. Elara cleared her throat, suddenly aware of the laundry piled on her armchair, and the single bare bulb flickering overhead. I did. I'm available Friday, but I need to know, what's the nature of the event? I usually like to understand the piano's context before I work on it. A pause. Then, an engagement party. Private. The family values discretion above all else. You will tune the piano in the ballroom between 3 and 6 p.m. The guests arrive at 7. You will not interact with anyone, unless spoken to. You will not discuss the family, the estate, or the event with anyone, before or after. Is that understood? Elara wanted to say that she tuned pianos, not state secrets, but 5 times her rate was 5 times her rate. Understood. The car will be a black Lincoln. The driver will have your name. Wear something dark. The line went dead. Elara stood in the middle of her apartment, the phone still pressed to her ear, and felt the first flutter of something she couldn't name. Not fear, exactly. More like the sensation of stepping onto a stage you didn't know existed, with a spotlight you never asked for, already trained on your face. The Whitmore estate was not a house. It was a declaration of war against modesty, a sprawling limestone monstrosity perched on the edge of the Hudson River, with turrets and terraces, and a driveway that wound through manicured gardens for nearly a mile before revealing the main entrance. The black Lincoln deposited Elara at a side door marked Service in brass letters, so small they were almost apologetic, and a silent man in a charcoal suit escorted her through a labyrinth of back hallways, past kitchens that smelled of rosemary and roasting lamb, past staff members who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had been trained not to exist. She clutched her tuning kit to her chest like a shield. She'd worn her best dress, a navy blue shift that skimmed her curves without clinging, with a modest neckline and 3/4 sleeves. It was the dress she wore to funerals and client consultations, the one that said, "I am competent and invisible." Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she'd applied the barest swipe of lipstick in the car, using the rear-view mirror, while the driver pretended not to watch. The ballroom, when they finally reached it, stole her breath. It was enormous, 2 stories tall with a vaulted ceiling, painted to look like a twilight sky. complete with gold leaf stars and a crescent moon that glowed faintly from some hidden light source. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The floor was a chessboard of black and white marble, polished to such a high shine that Elara could see her own reflection looking up at her, wide-eyed and out of place. And in the center of it all, on a raised dais draped in ivory silk, sat the piano. It was a Steinway Model D, just as the letter had promised, but it was unlike any Steinway Elara had ever seen. The case was black lacquer, so deep it seemed to swallow light, and the lid was propped open to reveal strings of gold. Actual gold, she realized as she drew closer. Not brass or copper, but some alloy that shimmered with an almost liquid warmth. The music rack was inlaid with mother-of-pearl, in a pattern of intertwining vines, and the bench was upholstered in velvet, the color of dried blood. "It's a 1923, but it's been modified," she murmured, running her fingers along the rim without quite touching it. "The strings aren't original. Neither are the hammers. Someone's been inside this instrument." The man in the charcoal suit had vanished. She was alone in the ballroom, surrounded by silence and starlight, and the faint scent of lemon polish. She set down her kit, opened the lid over the keyboard, and pressed middle C. The note that came out was perfect, round, warm, resonant, but there was something underneath it, a vibration so subtle that most ears would have missed it entirely. Elara's ears were not most ears. She had been born with a gift that her grandmother called the listening, an almost preternatural sensitivity to pitch and timbre, and the hidden architecture of sound. She could hear when a string was a quarter-cent flat, when a hammer was misaligned by a millimeter, when a soundboard had a hairline crack invisible to the naked eye. And she could hear, right now, that something inside this piano was wrong. She played the note again, holding it, letting it decay naturally. There, beneath the fundamental pitch, beneath the overtones, there was a faint metallic buzz. Not the buzz of a loose screw or a cracked bridge, but something else, something deliberate. She was reaching for her tuning lever when the doors at the far end of the ballroom burst open, and a woman swept in like a storm front. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, polished, curated, designed to be admired from a distance. Her hair was the color of champagne, swept up in an elaborate twist that exposed the long, elegant line of her neck. Her dress was a column of pale pink silk that probably cost more than Elara's annual rent, and her heels were so high and so sharp that they clicked against the marble like gunshots. She was followed by a small entourage, a young man with a tablet, a woman with a clipboard, a girl who looked barely 18, carrying a tray of fabric swatches. And she was talking, her voice carrying across the ballroom, with the clarity of someone who had never needed to whisper. "And I don't care what the florist says. I want peonies, not roses. Peonies are softer. They're more romantic. And if she can't source them from Holland, then she can source them from somewhere else. I'm not paying her $10,000 to tell me what's not available." She stopped when she saw Elara. The entourage stopped too, fanning out behind her, like a flock of startled birds. "Who are you?" Elara straightened, her hand still resting on the piano keys. "Elara Vance. I'm the piano tuner." The woman blinked. Her eyes were a pale, crystalline blue, and they traveled over Elara's body with the slow, assessing gaze of someone who had been raised to categorize people by their usefulness. She took in the navy dress, the sensible flats, the curves that the dress couldn't quite hide, the face that was pleasant but unremarkable, the hair that was already escaping its bun in wispy tendrils. "The piano tuner," she repeated, and her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. I forgot they were sending someone. Well, Don't mind me. I'm just checking on the arrangements. She turned to the woman with the clipboard. Make sure the caterers know about the shellfish allergy. If anyone goes into anaphylactic shock at my engagement party, I will be extremely displeased. She started to walk away, then paused, glancing back over her shoulder at Alara. That dress is very practical. I'm sure no one will even notice you're here, which is probably for the best, don't you think? The entourage tittered. The girl with the fabric swatches hid a smile behind her hand, and then they were gone, the doors swinging shut behind them, leaving Alara alone with the piano and the echo of the woman's words. She should have felt humiliated. A year ago she would have. A year ago she would have packed up her kit and walked out, her face burning, her throat tight with the familiar sting of being seen and dismissed in the same breath. But something had shifted in Alara over the past 12 months. A slow, tectonic realignment of her sense of self. She had spent her whole life trying to be invisible, trying to take up less space, trying to apologize for the body she inhabited. And where had it gotten her? A studio apartment, with a flickering light bulb and a tuning kit held together with hope. She was tired of being invisible. She was tired of being practical. And she was very, very tired of women like that one, who mistook thinness for superiority and cruelty for wit. She turned back to the piano and pressed middle C again. The buzz was still there. For the next 2 hours, Alara worked in a state of focused concentration that bordered on trance. She tuned every string, adjusted every hammer, regulated every key, until the action was as smooth as glass. But she kept coming back to that one note, C4, the middle of the keyboard, the heart of the instrument, and the strange, metallic resonance that hummed beneath it. She tried everything. She checked the string for imperfections. She examined the bridge pins. She inspected the damper felt. She even crawled underneath the piano with a flashlight, running her fingers along the soundboard, looking for cracks or warping or anything that might explain the anomaly. There was nothing. The piano was, by all objective measures, flawless. And yet, she sat on the velvet bench, her tuning kit spread out around her, and closed her eyes. She played C4 one more time, letting the note fill the ballroom, letting it decay into silence. And in that silence, she heard it, not with her ears, exactly, but with something deeper, something that vibrated in her chest, like a second heartbeat. There was something inside the piano, something that didn't belong. She opened her eyes and looked at the instrument with new understanding. The gold strings, the modified hammers, the mother-of-pearl inlay. Someone had been inside this piano, and they had left something behind. The question was what? And the question after that was why? She was reaching for her tuning lever, intending to remove the action and look inside the cavity, when a voice spoke from directly behind her. You hear it too, don't you? Alara spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. A young woman was standing at the edge of the dais, a violin case clutched to her chest. She was small and dark-haired, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that were the color of strong tea. She wore a simple black dress, and no jewelry except for a single silver ring on her left thumb. She looked to be in her early 20s, but there was something old in her expression, something watchful and wary. I'm sorry, Alara said, pressing a hand to her chest. I didn't hear you come in. No one ever does. The woman smiled, a quick, flickering thing that was gone, almost before it appeared. I'm Mira. I'm the violinist for tonight's quartet. I was just coming to check the acoustics before rehearsal. She nodded toward the piano. You've been playing that same note for 20 minutes. Most tuners would have moved on by now. Most tuners wouldn't have noticed anything wrong. Mira's smile returned, slower this time. No, they wouldn't. She set her violin case on the floor, and climbed onto the dais, her movements fluid and silent. Up close, Elara could see the calluses on her fingertips and the faint shadows under her eyes. "I saw something earlier. Before you arrived, I was in the hallway, warming up, and I saw a man come in here. He was alone. He opened the piano lid and did something inside. I couldn't see what, and then he left. He looked nervous." "What did he look like?" "Older. 60s, maybe. Gray hair, very distinguished, expensive suit. He had the same eyes as the bride." Elara felt a cold finger trace down her spine. "The bride's father?" "I think so. I've seen him at other events. His name is Aldrich Voss. He's connected." Connected. It was such a delicate word for what it actually meant. Elara had heard the name Voss before. Everyone in New York had, if they paid attention to the right news stories. Real estate, shipping, and, if the rumors were true, a network of influence that extended into places most people preferred not to think about. The Whitmore family, the ones who owned this estate, were supposedly even more connected than the Vosses. The engagement party was meant to unite two dynasties, two empires, two bloodlines that had been circling each other for generations. And Aldrich Voss had been inside the piano. "Did you tell anyone?" Elara asked. Mira shook her head. "Who would I tell? The security team works for the Whitmores. The staff works for the Whitmores. I'm just a violinist. No one listens to the musicians." She paused, her dark eyes meeting Elara's. "But you're not just a musician, are you? You're the one who hears things." It wasn't a question. Elara wondered how Mira knew, but she didn't ask. There were some things that people like them. The invisible ones, the overlooked ones, simply recognized in each other. "I need to see what's inside," Elara said, "but I can't do it alone. If someone comes in while I'm working, I need a warning." Mira nodded, as if she'd been expecting this. "I'll watch the door. The rehearsal doesn't start for another hour. No one should come in before then." Removing the action from a grand piano is delicate work under the best of circumstances. Doing it while your hands are trembling and your heart is pounding, and you're half convinced that a Mafia patriarch is going to walk through the door at any moment, is something else entirely. Elara worked as quickly as she dared, loosening the screws that held the action bracket in place, sliding the entire mechanism, keys, hammers, dampers, all of it, out of the piano's body like a drawer. The cavity beneath was dark, and smelled of old wood and metal, and something else, something sharp and chemical. Elara pulled out her flashlight and aimed it inside. At first, she saw nothing, just the usual interior of a grand piano. The soundboard, the ribs, the plate, the strings stretching away into shadow. But then, the beam of her flashlight caught something, a glint of plastic and wire tucked into the curve of the rim, just behind the point where the bass strings crossed over the tenor. It was small, no bigger than a matchbox. It was black, designed to blend into the darkness, and it was attached to the soundboard with a strip of what looked like surgical tape. A thin wire ran from it to a second device, slightly larger, wedged between two ribs, a microphone, a transmitter, a recording device. Elara's breath caught in her throat. "What is it?" Mira's voice, low and urgent from the doorway. "It's a bug," Elara whispered. "Someone's been listening. Someone's been recording everything that's said in this room." She reached in and carefully, peeled the tape away from the soundboard. The device came free in her hand, small and cold, and humming, with a faint electronic life. She stared at it, her mind racing. The engagement party, the private conversations, the Mafia families, Aldrich Voss, the bride's father, planting a listening device in the piano before the biggest social event of the year. This wasn't just eavesdropping. This was a setup. This was evidence gathering. This was the kind of move that could bring down an empire or start a war. "What are you going to do?" Mira asked. Elara looked at the device in her palm, then at the piano, then at the ballroom doors that would soon open to admit 200 of the most dangerous people in New York. "I'm going to do my job," she said, "and then I'm going to do what no one expects." The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock sharp, a parade of black town cars and gleaming limousines that disgorged men in tailored tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered like oil slicks. Elara watched from a service corridor, her tuning kit packed and ready by her feet, her heart beating a steady, deliberate rhythm against her ribs. She had put the device back, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to. Removing it would have tipped off whoever was listening. Leaving it in place and doing nothing would have been complicity. But leaving it in place and using it, that was something else entirely. She had a plan. It was a terrible plan, a reckless plan, a plan that could get her killed or worse. But it was the only plan she had, and as she watched the guests stream into the ballroom, she felt a strange, unfamiliar calm settle over her. She was invisible. The bride had said so herself. No one would notice her, and that, she realized, was her greatest weapon. The string quartet began to play, something light and classical, Mozart maybe, or Haydn. Mira was there, her violin tucked under her chin, her eyes meeting Elara's for just a moment, across the crowded room. She gave a tiny nod. She was ready. Elara slipped into the ballroom through a side door, keeping close to the wall, her dark dress blending into the shadows. The room was a sea of silk and jewels and murmured conversation, the air thick with perfume and ambition. She scanned the crowd, looking for the faces she'd researched on her phone during the break. Aldrich Voss, silver-haired and patrician, holding court near the bar. His daughter, the bride, radiant in a gown of ivory lace, her hand resting on the arm of a man Elara didn't recognize. And then, finally, the man she'd been looking for. Dorian Whitmore, the Mafia boss, the head of the Whitmore family, the man whose engagement party this was supposed to be. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and hard planes. He wore his tuxedo like armor, and his eyes, even from across the room, were the color of winter storms. He was standing near the piano, talking to a group of men, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man who had never been surprised in his life. Elara was about to change that. She waited until the quartet finished their piece, until the applause faded, until the bride stepped onto the dais and clapped her hands for attention. "Welcome, everyone." Her voice was bright and brittle, like a bell made of glass. "Thank you so much for being here tonight, to celebrate our engagement. Dorian and I are so happy to share this evening with all of you. And now, before we begin the toasts, I'd like to invite our pianist to play something special." She gestured toward the piano, and a young man in a tuxedo, the hired pianist, Elara assumed, started toward the dais. But Elara was already moving, slipping through the crowd with the quiet determination of a woman who had spent her whole life learning how not to be seen. She reached the piano before the pianist did. She sat down on the velvet bench. She placed her fingers on the keys. The bride's smile faltered. "Excuse me, what are you doing? You're the tuner. Get off the piano." Elara didn't move. She looked up at the bride, at her perfect face, and her perfect dress, and her perfect, crumbling composure, and she said, very calmly, "I tuned this piano. I know every note it can play, and there's one note in particular that I think everyone should hear." She pressed C4. The note rang out, pure and clear, filling the ballroom. and beneath it, amplified by the microphone hidden inside the instrument, came a sound that no one expected. A burst of static, a high-pitched whine, and then a voice, tinny but unmistakable, echoing from the speakers that had been set up for the quartet. The shipment arrives Tuesday. Whitmore doesn't suspect a thing. Once we have the recordings from tonight, we'll have everything we need to take him down. It was Aldrich Voss's voice, recorded, playing back through the very device he had planted. The ballroom went silent, the kind of silence that comes before an explosion. Dorian Whitmore turned, slowly, his eyes finding his fiancée's father across the room. Aldrich Voss had gone pale, his glass of champagne frozen halfway to his lips. The bride was staring at Alara with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. "What is this?" Dorian's voice was soft, almost conversational, but it carried through the ballroom like a blade. "What have you done?" The recording continued. "The engagement is a farce. My daughter knows her role. She'll keep him distracted while we move our people into place. By the end of the month, the Whitmore organization will be ours." Alara lifted her fingers from the keys. The recording stopped. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. "I found a listening device inside the piano," she said, her voice steady, even though her hands were shaking. "It was planted there by Mr. Voss. I assume he intended to record your private conversations tonight and use them against you. I thought you should know." She stood up from the bench, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She didn't look at the bride. She didn't look at Aldrich Voss. She looked at Dorian Whitmore, and she waited. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The entire ballroom seemed to be holding its breath. 200 people suspended in a moment of absolute, crystalline tension. And then Dorian Whitmore smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just been handed an excuse. "Aldrich," he said, still in that soft, conversational tone, "I think we need to have a conversation, in private." Aldrich Voss opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. 2 men in dark suits materialized at his elbows, and he was escorted, gently but inexorably, out of the ballroom. The bride made a sound, a small, wounded noise, and took a step toward Dorian. "Dorian, please, I didn't know." "You didn't know." He turned to look at her, and his expression was almost pitying. "You didn't know that your father was planning to destroy my family. You didn't know that he planted a recording device in my piano. You didn't know any of it. Is that what you're telling me? I swear." "Don't." The word was quiet, but it cut through her protests like a knife. "Don't lie to me. Not here. Not in front of all these people. It's embarrassing." He turned away from her, dismissing her as thoroughly as if she had ceased to exist. His eyes found Alara, still standing beside the piano, still trembling, still very much visible. "You," he said. "What's your name?" "Alara Vance." "Alara Vance." He said her name, like he was tasting it, like he was deciding whether it was worth remembering. "You're the piano tuner." "Yes." "You found the device." "Yes." And instead of ignoring it, or removing it quietly, or using it to blackmail anyone, you chose to expose it, publicly, at my engagement party, in front of everyone I know. Alara swallowed. It seemed like the right thing to do. Dorian Whitmore stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle even him. "The right thing to do. You're in a room full of criminals and killers, and people who have built their fortunes on doing the wrong thing, and you did the right thing." "I'm not a criminal," Alara said. "I'm a piano tuner." "Yes," he said, and his smile softened, just slightly, around the edges. You are. He turned to address the room, his voice rising to fill the space. The engagement is off. The party is over. My security team will escort everyone out. Thank you for coming. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then the ballroom erupted into chaos. Voices raised, chairs scraping, the quartet hastily packing up their instruments. The bride was crying, great heaving sobs that ruined her perfect makeup. Aldrich Voss was already gone, vanished into whatever private hell Dorian Whitmore had prepared for him, and Elara stood beside the piano, watching it all unfold, feeling like she was standing in the eye of a hurricane. Mira appeared at her elbow, her violin case clutched to her chest. "That was insane," she whispered. "You're insane. I can't believe you did that." "Neither can I," Elara admitted. "What are you going to do now?" Before Elara could answer, a hand closed around her elbow, firm, but not painful. She looked up to find one of the dark-suited security men standing beside her. "Mr. Whitmore would like to speak with you," he said, privately. The study was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long hallway lined with portraits of dead Whitmores. It was a masculine room, all dark wood and leather, and the faint smell of cigar smoke, with a fireplace big enough to stand in, and windows that looked out over the Hudson River. Dorian Whitmore was standing by the window when Elara was escorted in, his jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and ink. Tattoos, she realized, dark shapes that twisted up from his wrists and disappeared under the fabric. "Leave us," he said, and the security man vanished, closing the door behind him. Elara stood in the middle of the room, her tuning kit still clutched in one hand, and waited. She had no idea what to expect. Gratitude, maybe, or anger. She had, after all, ruined his engagement party and humiliated his fiancée in front of everyone he knew. Or maybe just indifference, a curt dismissal, and a check for her services, and a warning never to speak of what she'd seen. What she did not expect was for him to turn away from the window, look at her with those winter storm eyes, and say, "You saved my life tonight." She blinked. What? The recordings, the conversations, my father-in-law-to-be was planning to capture. They would have included details of certain business arrangements that, if they became public, would have resulted in my arrest, or my death, probably both. He smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "You didn't just expose a betrayal, Miss Vance. You prevented a coup." "I just found a bug in a piano," Elara said. I wasn't trying to." "I know." He crossed the room toward her, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "That's what makes it so remarkable. Everyone in my world has an angle. Everyone wants something. But you just did the right thing, because it was the right thing." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and woodsy, with an undertone of smoke. He was tall, much taller than her, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I owe you a debt," he said, "and I always pay my debts. What do you want, Elara Vance? Money? Protection? A job? Name it, and it's yours." Elara thought about it. She thought about her cramped studio apartment, and her flickering light bulb, and her worn-out tuning hammers. She thought about the bride's dismissive smile, and the way the entourage had tittered. She thought about all the years she'd spent trying to be invisible, trying to take up less space, trying to apologize for existing. "I want to be seen," she said. Dorian Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "Seen? I've spent my whole life being invisible. People look at me, and they see a fat woman in a practical dress. They see someone they can ignore, someone they can dismiss, someone who doesn't matter. I'm tired of it. I want to matter." He was silent for a long moment. studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she didn't. She held his gaze, her chin lifted, her shoulders squared. "You matter," he said finally. "You mattered the moment you heard that note. You mattered the moment you decided to do something about it. The question is, what are you going to do with that now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been in this position before." "Then let me help you." He reached out and very gently took her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused, and they engulfed hers completely. "Stay. Not as a guest, not as an employee. Stay as a consultant. Someone who can hear things that other people can't. Someone who can see things that other people miss. I have enemies, Ilara. More than I can count. Having someone like you in my corner could make all the difference." It was insane. It was reckless. It was the kind of offer that could get her killed, or worse. But as she stood there, her hand in his, the firelight flickering across his face, she realized that she had already crossed the line. She had already stepped onto the stage. The spotlight was already on her face. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay." The weeks that followed were a blur of new faces and new routines, and a slow, careful education in the inner workings of the Whitmore organization. Ilara was given a room in the estate, not a servant's room, but a proper guest suite, with a 4-poster bed and a marble bathroom, and windows that looked out over the gardens. She was given a wardrobe, too, at Dorian's insistence. Dresses that fit her curves, instead of hiding them. Fabrics that felt like water against her skin. Colors that made her eyes look brighter, and her skin look warmer. "You're not invisible anymore," he said when she protested. "You might as well look the part." She learned the names of his lieutenants. Matteo, the quiet one with the scarred hands. Lena, the sharp-eyed woman who ran his intelligence network. Gregor, the giant, who served as his bodyguard, and rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time. She learned the layout of the estate, the schedules of the staff, the protocols for security breaches and emergency evacuations. She learned that Dorian Whitmore was ruthless and dangerous, and capable of terrible things, but also that he was fiercely loyal to the people he considered his own, and that he had a dry, unexpected sense of humor that emerged at the strangest moments. And she learned that he was watching her, not in a threatening way, not in the way a predator watches prey, but in a way that made her feel seen. He noticed when she was tired. He noticed when she was uncomfortable. He noticed the small things, the way she tapped her fingers when she was thinking, the way she hummed when she was nervous, the way her face lit up when she talked about music. "You're different," he said one evening, finding her in the ballroom, sitting at the piano. The instrument had been thoroughly examined and swept for bugs, and the gold strings had been replaced with standard ones, at Ilara's request, from anyone I've ever known. She looked up from the keys, her fingers still resting on middle C. "Different how?" "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" He considered the question. "Most people are. Most people haven't spent their whole lives being underestimated," she said. "After a while, you stop being afraid of things that can hurt you. You start being afraid of things that can make you disappear." He sat down on the bench beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through her dress. "I'm not going to let you disappear." "I know," she said, and she did. It was the strangest thing. She had known this man for less than a month, and yet she trusted him more than she had ever trusted anyone. Maybe it was because he had seen her at her most visible, her most exposed, and he hadn't looked away. Maybe it was because he had given her a choice when he could have given her an order. Or maybe it was just the way he looked at her, like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "Play something," he said. "What?" "Play something. On the piano. I've heard you tune it 100 times, but I've never heard you actually play." She hesitated. She was a good pianist, not a great one, not a concert-level talent, but good enough to accompany a choir or play at a wedding. But playing for someone else, playing for him, felt different. It felt like an unveiling. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. It was a piece she had learned as a child, a Chopin nocturne that her grandmother had loved. It was slow and melancholy and full of longing, and as she played, she felt the familiar ache of it settle into her bones. She played for her grandmother, who had been the first person to tell her she had the listening. She played for all the years she'd spent trying to disappear. She played for the woman she was becoming, the woman who had stood up in a ballroom full of criminals and done the right thing. When she finished, the last note fading into silence, she didn't look at him. She couldn't. Her eyes were wet, and her throat was tight, and she was afraid that if she looked at him, she would see indifference, or boredom, or the polite condescension she had learned to expect from beautiful people. Ilara. His voice was rough. She turned her head, and what she saw in his face made her breath catch. He was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world, like she was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking, like she was, in that moment, the most important person he had ever met. That was beautiful, he said. It was just a nocturne. It wasn't just anything. He reached up and very gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. You're not invisible, Ilara. You never were. You were just waiting for someone to see you. And you see me? I see you. He leaned in, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. She closed her eyes and felt his lips brush against hers. Soft, tentative, nothing like the ruthless Mafia boss she'd read about in the papers. It was the kiss of a man who was afraid of breaking something precious. When he pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, he said, "Stay with me. Not as a consultant, not as an employee. Stay with me as what? As mine." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ilara thought about all the reasons she should say no. The danger, the violence, the world he inhabited that was so far removed from her own. But she also thought about the way he looked at her, the way he listened to her, the way he made her feel like she mattered. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." The transition from consultant to something more was not immediate. Dorian Whitmore was a careful man, and he understood that the world he inhabited was not kind to the people he cared about. He kept Ilara close, but he also kept her protected. Bodyguards, secure locations, a new phone with encrypted messaging. She chafed against the restrictions at first, but she understood them. She had seen what happened to Aldrich Voss. She had heard the rumors about what had happened to the bride, who had disappeared from society pages and gossip columns as thoroughly as if she had never existed. "Is she dead?" Ilara asked one night, lying in the massive bed in Dorian's suite, her head resting on his chest. "Who?" "The bride. Your fiancé." He was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "No, she's not dead. She's elsewhere. Her father's betrayal was not her fault. Not entirely. But she knew about it. She was complicit. I couldn't let that go unpunished." "What did you do to her?" "I sent her away. She's living in Europe now, under a new name, with a stipend that will keep her comfortable, but not powerful. She'll never return to New York. She'll never contact anyone from her old life. She'll never be a threat to me, or to anyone I care about." Ilara considered this. It was more mercy than she had expected. "And her father?" Dorian's hand stilled on her shoulder. "Aldrich Voss is no longer a concern." The finality in his voice made her shiver. She didn't ask for details. She didn't want to know. "I'm not like them. she said quietly. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a strategist. I'm just a piano tuner who heard a wrong note. You're not just anything. He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. You're the woman who saved my life. You're the woman who stood up in front of 200 people and did the right thing. You're the woman who plays Chopin like her heart is breaking. You're not just anything, Elara. You're everything. She kissed him then, because she didn't have words for what she was feeling. And he kissed her back, and the world outside the bedroom door, the danger, the violence, the endless machinations of Mafia politics, faded into insignificance. Mira became a regular presence at the estate. After the engagement party, Dorian had offered her a position as part of his household staff, not as a violinist, but as an extra set of eyes and ears, someone who could move through spaces unnoticed and report back on what she saw. It was a role she took to with surprising ease, her musician's training giving her an almost supernatural ability to read body language and detect subtle shifts in mood. You're different, she said to Elara one afternoon, finding her in the garden. It was early autumn, and the leaves were just beginning to turn, the air crisp and clean. Happier. I am, Elara admitted. It's strange. I spent so long thinking that happiness wasn't for people like me, that I was too fat, too plain, too invisible, and now you're the mistress of a mafia boss. Mira grinned. It suits you. I'm not his mistress. I'm his. She trailed off, unsure what word to use. Girlfriend seemed too trivial. Partner seemed too formal. Lover seemed too intimate to say out loud. You're his, Mira said simply, and he's yours. Anyone with eyes can see it. Elara felt her cheeks flush. Is it that obvious? The way he looks at you? Like you hung the moon? Yeah, it's pretty obvious. Mira's grin faded, replaced by something more serious. But you need to be careful. The Voss family isn't gone. They're weakened, but they're not destroyed. And there are other families, other enemies, who would love to use you against him. I know. Dorian's told me. I have security. I have protocols. You have a target on your back. Mira's voice was gentle but firm. You're not invisible anymore, Elara. You're the opposite. You're the woman who brought down Aldrich Voss. You're the woman Dorian Whitmore loves. That makes you a weapon that his enemies will try to use. Elara looked out over the garden, at the roses that were still blooming, despite the cooling weather, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I know, she said again, but I'm not going to let fear control me. I spent my whole life being afraid. Afraid of being seen, afraid of being judged, afraid of taking up space. I'm done with that. Mira was silent for a moment. Then she nodded, a small, approving smile crossing her face. Good, because I have a feeling you're going to need that courage. The attack came 3 weeks later, on a night that started out like any other. Elara was in the ballroom, alone, sitting at the piano. She had taken to playing in the evenings, after dinner, when the house was quiet and the staff had retired to their quarters. It was her time to think, to process, to remind herself of who she was beneath all the new clothes and new routines and new expectations. She was playing the Chopin Nocturne again, the one she had played for Dorian that first night. Her fingers moved through the familiar patterns, and she let her mind drift, thinking about her grandmother, about her cramped studio apartment, about the long, strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't hear the footsteps crossing the marble floor, but she felt it, a shift in the air, a vibration that hummed through the piano and into her fingers. She stopped playing. Don't move. The voice was low and rough, and it came from directly behind her. She felt the cold circle of a gun barrel press against the back of her neck. "You're the piano tuner," the voice said. "The one who ruined everything. Aldrich Voss sends his regards." Ilara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were frozen on the keys, her mind racing. The security protocols, the panic button in her pocket, the bodyguards who were supposed to be stationed outside the door. "They're dead," the voice said, as if reading her thoughts. "The guards, the staff in the hallway, everyone between me and you, so don't bother screaming. What do you want?" Ilara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I want you to come with me, quietly, without a fuss. Mr. Voss wants to have a conversation with you. A long, slow conversation about loyalty and consequences." The gun pressed harder against her neck. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her lids, she saw Dorian's face. She saw the way he looked at her. She saw the way he said her name. She was not going to let this man take her. She was not going to be invisible again. She opened her eyes and looked at the piano keys. Her fingers were still resting on them, trembling but steady, and she remembered, suddenly, the thing that had started all of this, the wrong note, the hidden vibration, the secret that no one else could hear. She pressed middle C. The note rang out, pure and clear, and beneath it, she heard something. Not a recording device this time, but something else. A resonance, a frequency, a vibration that traveled through the piano, through the floor, through the very bones of the house. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know if anyone would hear it. But she pressed the note again, holding it, letting it build, letting it fill the ballroom with its strange, insistent hum. "Stop that," the voice snarled. "Stop playing." The door burst open. Dorian Whitmore stood in the doorway, his gun drawn, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, Gregor and Matteo and a half-dozen other men fanned out, their weapons trained on the man behind Ilara. "Drop it," Dorian said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the ballroom like a thunderclap. "Drop the gun, or I will put a bullet through your skull before you can pull the trigger." The man behind Ilara hesitated. She could feel his indecision in the way the gun barrel wavered against her neck. Then, slowly, he lowered the weapon. "Smart choice," Dorian said. "Gregor, take him. I want to know who sent him, how he got in, and who else is involved. Use whatever methods you deem necessary." Gregor stepped forward, his massive hands closing around the man's shoulders like a vice. The man was dragged away, his protests muffled by a hand over his mouth. And then Dorian was crossing the ballroom, his gun holstered, his face shifting from fury to something else, something that looked almost like fear. Ilara. He knelt beside the piano bench, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching hers. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," she whispered. "I'm fine. I played the note. I didn't know if you would hear it. I didn't know if anyone would hear it. I heard it." He pressed his forehead against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I was in my study, and I heard it. That note. That same note you played at the engagement party. I knew something was wrong. I knew you were in trouble." "How?" "Because you told me. That first night, you told me that you could hear things that other people couldn't. And I realized that I could hear you, that I would always hear you." She started to cry then. Great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you. You're safe. You're safe." The aftermath was brutal and swift. The man who had attacked Ilara was a former associate of Aldrich Voss, a hired gun who had been promised a fortune in exchange for delivering her to his employer. Under Gregor's expert interrogation, he revealed the location of Voss's safe house, the names of his remaining allies, and the details of a plan to destabilize the Whitmore organization through a series of targeted attacks. Dorian dealt with it all, with the cold efficiency that had made him one of the most feared men in New York. But when it was over, when the last of Voss's allies had been neutralized and the threat had been eliminated, he came back to Elara and held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "I almost lost you," he said. They were in his suite, the curtains drawn against the morning light, the bed a tangle of sheets and limbs. I can't do that again. I can't lose you. You didn't lose me." She traced the lines of his face with her fingertips, the sharp cheekbones, the strong jaw, the faint scar above his left eyebrow. "I'm right here. I want you to marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Elara's hand stilled on his face. "What?" "I want you to marry me. Not because you saved my life. Not because you're useful. Not because of any strategic advantage. I want you to marry me because I love you. Because I can't imagine my life without you. Because you're the only person who has ever seen me, really seen me, and not looked away." She stared at him, her heart pounding. "Dorian, I'm a piano tuner. I don't belong in your world." "You belong wherever I am." He took her hand, pressing it against his chest, over his heart. "You belong here, with me, always." She thought about all the reasons she should say no, the danger, the violence, the enemies, who would always be circling. But she also thought about the way he looked at her, the way he listened to her, the way he made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding was small, by Whitmore standards. Only 100 guests, held in the ballroom where they had first met, with the piano, now restored to its original glory, serving as the centerpiece. Mira played the violin, a piece she had composed herself, something haunting and beautiful that made Elara cry. Gregor stood as Dorian's best man, his massive frame squeezed into a tuxedo that looked like it might burst at the seams. Matteo and Lena sat in the front row, their expressions carefully neutral, but Elara caught Lena dabbing at her eyes during the vows. Elara wore a dress of deep emerald green, a color that made her skin glow, and her eyes look like amber. It was cut to flatter her curves, with a neckline that showed off her shoulders, and a skirt that swirled around her ankles when she walked. She had never felt more beautiful. She had never felt more seen. Dorian wore a black tuxedo with a green pocket square that matched her dress. When she walked down the aisle toward him, his eyes never left her face. And when he said his vows, promises of protection and devotion, and a love that would outlast empires, his voice was steady and sure. "I was a man who heard only what I wanted to hear," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "And then I met a woman who heard everything, who heard the wrong note in a perfect instrument, who heard the truth beneath the lies, who heard me, even when I didn't know I was speaking. Elara Vance, you are the music in my silence. You are the note that makes everything else make sense. I will spend the rest of my life listening to you." Elara's vows were simpler, but no less heartfelt. "I spent my whole life trying to be invisible," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I thought that if I was small enough, quiet enough, unobtrusive enough, I would be safe. But safety isn't the same as living. You taught me that. You saw me when no one else did. You heard me when no one else could. You made me believe that I deserved to take up space. I will spend the rest of my life being visible. For you, and for myself." When they kissed, the ballroom erupted in applause, and Elara, standing in the arms of the most dangerous man in New York, felt something she had never felt before. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The reception was a blur of champagne and dancing and well-wishes from people whose names she would never remember. At some point, Mira found her by the piano, a glass of champagne in each hand. "You did it," Mira said, pressing one of the glasses into Elara's hand. "You actually did it. You went from invisible piano tuner to Mafia queen." "I'm not a queen," Elara protested. "You're married to the king. That makes you a queen." Mira grinned. "Besides, you're the one who saved his life. Twice. If anything, he should be your consort." Elara laughed, the sound bright and free. "I don't think Dorian would appreciate being called a consort." "Probably not. But he'd let you call him anything you wanted. I've never seen a man so gone for someone." Mira's grin softened into something more sincere. "I'm happy for you, Elara. Really. You deserve this." "Thank you." Elara reached out and squeezed Mira's hand. "For everything. For watching the door that first night. For being my friend. For playing that beautiful piece at the ceremony." "It was my pleasure." Mira raised her glass. "To the woman who heard the wrong note and changed everything." "To the wrong note," Elara echoed, and they drank. Later, much later, when the guests had gone home and the ballroom was empty and the piano sat silent beneath the painted stars, Dorian led Elara back to the dais. He sat down on the velvet bench and pulled her onto his lap, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Play something," he said. "What?" "Play something. For me. For us." She placed her fingers on the keys and thought about what to play. The Chopin Nocturne felt too melancholy for a wedding night. Something classical felt too formal. She wanted something that was just for them, something that captured the strange, improbable journey that had brought them here. She began to play. It was a simple melody, something she made up on the spot, a tune that started soft and tentative, and then built into something fuller, richer, more confident. It was the sound of a woman learning to take up space. It was the sound of a man learning to listen. It was the sound of two people finding each other in a world that had tried to keep them apart. When she finished, Dorian didn't speak. He just held her tighter, his face pressed against her hair, his breath warm on her neck. "I love you," he said finally. "I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you, Elara. I love you too." She turned her head and kissed him, slow and deep. "Now take me to bed, Mr. Whitmore." "As you wish, Mrs. Whitmore." He stood, lifting her in his arms like she weighed nothing at all, and carried her out of the ballroom. Behind them, the piano sat silent and still, its strings humming with the ghost of the melody she had played. And somewhere in the house, a single note, middle C, echoed faintly through the halls, a reminder of the moment that had changed everything. The years that followed were not always easy. The Whitmore organization faced challenges: rival families, law enforcement investigations, internal power struggles. But through it all, Elara remained at Dorian's side, her sharp ears and sharper instincts proving invaluable, time and time again. She became known in certain circles as the listener, the woman who could hear a lie in a heartbeat, who could detect a threat before it materialized, who could find the hidden note in any situation. She never forgot where she came from. She kept her tuning kit, the old one with the worn-out hammers, in a glass case in her study. She visited her grandmother's grave every year on the anniversary of her death. And whenever she felt the old insecurities creeping back, the fear of being too much, too visible, too present, she would go to the ballroom and play the piano, letting the music remind her of who she was. Mira stayed with them, rising through the ranks of the organization until she became one of Dorian's most trusted advisors. She and Elara remained close, their friendship forged in the crucible of that first night, and tempered by everything that came after. And Dorian never stopped looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. He never stopped listening to her, never stopped valuing her opinion, never stopped treating her as an equal partner in every sense of the word. He was still dangerous, still ruthless, still capable of terrible things. But with her, he was gentle. With her, he was vulnerable. With her, he was just a man who had found the one person who could hear him. One evening, years after their wedding, they sat together on the balcony of their bedroom, watching the sun set over the Hudson River. Elara was curled up in a chair, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and Dorian was standing at the railing, his silhouette dark against the orange sky. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, not turning around. "Marrying me? Getting pulled into this world?" She considered the question. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. I regret the violence. Sometimes. I regret the people who got hurt. But I don't regret you. I don't regret us." He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "I would understand if you did. I've done terrible things. I will probably do more terrible things before I'm done. You deserve someone better, someone kinder." "I don't want someone kinder." She stood up, letting the blanket fall, and crossed the balcony to stand beside him. "I want you, the real you, the one who listens to me, the one who sees me, the one who loves me." He pulled her into his arms, his chin resting on top of her head. "I do love you, more than I ever thought I was capable of loving anyone. I know." She pressed her ear against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I can hear it." He laughed, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her whole body. "Of course you can. You hear everything." "Not everything," she said, "just the things that matter." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, watching the sun sink below the horizon. And in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a piano, someone playing in the ballroom, a simple melody that rose and fell like a heartbeat. Elara smiled. It was the tune she had composed on their wedding night, the one that told the story of how they had found each other. Someone must have learned it. Mira, probably, or one of the household staff who had heard it often enough to memorize it. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "I hear it," Dorian said. "It's beautiful. It's us." He kissed the top of her head. "Yes, it is." And as the last notes of the melody faded into the evening air, Elara closed her eyes and listened to the music, to the river, to the steady beat of her husband's heart. She had spent so many years trying to be invisible, trying to disappear into the background, trying to take up as little space as possible. But now, standing on a balcony overlooking an empire, wrapped in the arms of a man who would burn the world down to keep her safe, she realized that she had finally found her place. She was not invisible. She was not forgettable. She was not just a piano tuner. She was Elara Whitmore. She was the woman who heard the wrong note and changed everything, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure that the music never stopped.